just in concept of what a print is. It's just imprinting something on somebody else.
Hello, print friends, and welcome to the 72nd episode of Pine Copper Lime, the internet's #1 printmaking podcast. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. I release weekly podcasts with people in the print world who are doing something a bit beyond the expected. So please subscribe on your podcast listening app of choice. You can also find Pine Copper Lime on Instagram and Facebook, and you can sign up for our monthly newsletter with print news from around the world, all at pinecopperlime.com. We also have a Patreon page, where supporters toss a buck or two in our tip jar every month, and it helps keeping us bringing you printmaking content every week. You can also get cool thank yous, like stickers and totes, so if that sounds like something you might be interested in, you can check out the link in the show notes. It's also just totally fine if you don't want to know more about that because times are tough, and if you just want to listen to the show and enjoy what you hear, we just want you to do that too. Print friends, we are happy to tell you that after 2 years, Pine Copper Lime finally has merch available, like stickers and totes and shirts and even little onesies with our logo. But we did not stop there. We're about printmaking because we're about good times. If you want a good print bun to confuse your friends and family this holiday season, head on over to TeePublic with the link in the show notes and check those out. Printmaking forever, shun the non-believers. Pine Copper Lime is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, who've been offering a diverse range of high-quality products for your creative practice since 1997. Products like Arnheim 1618, a high-quality, low-cost paper made in collaboration with a historic paper mill near the city of Arnheim. Our editor, Timothy Pauschak, swears by it for printing lithographs. And our friend of the podcast and guest of episode number 4, Miles Calvert, evangelizes its use yearly, encouraging his students to participate in Speedball's New Impressions contest, where they can produce work in every print medium. So, if you're looking for an affordable paper that can support whatever kind of inky idea you can throw at it, then head over to speedballart.com, where you can pick up the start of your next edition. My guests this week are Becci Spruill and Olivia Richardson of the Radical Intersectional Printmakers Guild. Becci and Olivia are founding members of this new printmaking organization. We'll talk about each of their backgrounds and printmaking practices, unpack what the organization is and why it is a quote-unquote guild, as well as the impressions we leave on each other as the world of prints, and welcome everyone into the cause by saying out loud what we've all been thinking: paintings are just monotypes. Also, we recorded this episode a few weeks ago, and since then, they have been very busy. They have actually formed their interim board of founding members, which includes Olivia and Becci, of course, but as well Seedig, Ruben Castillo, and Stephanie Alaniz, who you may remember from episode 30 of this podcast. They are in the process of writing their bylaws and looking for input from prospective members. So if you like what you hear here, make sure to check them out on their YouTube channel where they publish all of their meetings, or get in touch with them through the link in the show notes. They'll be announcing their first member exhibition soon, so don't miss it. Now, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to shake things up with the Radical Intersectional Printmakers Guild. Hi Olivia, hi Becci, how's it going?
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you for joining me. I know that we were doing coordination across 3 time zones to get this call to happen, so I really appreciate both of your flexibility and your enthusiasm in getting this to work.
Well, thank you for having us also.
I'm definitely excited to chat and to learn more about your project and your plans. I know that you just recently released another meeting, so things are in the works for you. But before we dive into what it is that you're building, would you both just let listeners know a little bit about yourselves, just sort of who you are, where you are, and what you do, so we know who we're talking with?
So I was raised by, I like to say, a pack of rabid feminists
Yes.
in the South. I'm from North Carolina, and I was raised by a single mom, so I spent a lot of time in less well-off neighborhoods. I'm an undergraduate from the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, and I got a dual major in sociology and art, which is kind of where my interest in the social realm and how art kind of fits into it came from. And then I went to graduate school at Kansas State University. So I'm a neurodiverse printmaker. I have some significant ADHD problems. They're primarily inattentive. And that's part of why I've kind of wanted to create a group that is more amenable to a variety of different outlooks and life experiences. I'm also mixed and bisexual and just in general kind of at a bunch of different intersections in identity. And I felt like a lot of those identities possibly haven't been served to the best of their ability. And I knew other people kind of felt that same way. So, but that might be fast forwarding a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Yeah, beautiful groundwork for sure.
My art practice focuses a lot on taking personal inner experiences and sort of amplifying them into community experiences, community-based conversations. So my most recent large body of work that is theoretically complete is my large monsters, which are all technically self-portraits, but also portraits that become kind of agendered, kind of a-identified. And because of that, I've been able to kind of talk about the way that viewing myself as less than ideal, viewing myself as really and genuinely the unideal version of myself and of all my identities. I've really been able to develop conversations about that with other people through my artwork. And so that's kind of the focus that I tend to take there.
I feel like I could do an entire other podcast talking about that. That sounds so interesting. We'll make sure to let people know where they can find both your personal works as well before the end of the podcast, so people can know your artistic practice as well as your artistic societal organizational practice as well.
All right. Well, I am from Woodbridge, Virginia, which is part of Northern Virginia. So that's the greater DMV area. So I grew up around a lot of art. I guess I should say art's plural. So not just art galleries and museums, but musicals, music, any kind of category of art under the sun. And both my parents, really my whole family, has been very encouraging of the arts. My dad was a music educator before becoming a lawyer, which is a big switch.
Yeah.
And my grandpa was also a music educator. So art in general just is very prevalent in my life. I'm also a former Girl Scout, all 12 years. So social justice is and community is very big, is a very big part of my identity. And my mom was my leader, as well as my older sister's leader. So I went to West Virginia University to get my BFA in printmaking, and I also got a minor in art history. And that's really where something I like to tell people is I'm a big kind of I wouldn't say planner, but once I've decided I'm doing something, it's going to happen. Mm. So in 5th grade, my dad, who's also a WVU alumni, took me and my family to homecoming. I cannot tell you what year that was, but I saw the Pride of West Virginia Mountaineer Marching Band, and I immediately fell in love. And in 5th grade, I decided I'm going to West Virginia University. I'm going to be in marching band, not just marching band, but drumline. And I'm going to major in fashion design.
Amazing.
And I did all of that except fashion design. I ended up in print, which is kind of a lovely story. I was originally a photography major, and I took an intro to lithography class because the intro classes are litho and intaglio with Joseph Lupo. Mm-hmm. And it changed my life forever. Drawing on my first print, as everybody's is absolute garbage. But I just fell in love drawing on a stone, and the process of it all and the chemistry of it all and just the community that like was fostered by the environment Joe provided, but also all the other students who I got to work with. Like print seemed like a magical thing to me because of that experience. And I was first introduced to SGCI through Joe. And I also will never forget the first SGCI I went to was Atlanta. And that's where I met very briefly. I'm sure he would not remember this if I brought it up to him, but Aaron Coleman.
Oh, yeah.
And now I'm pursuing, I guess, my BFA in printmaking at the U of A under him and Cerise Faden, as well as trying to get a museum study certification, but we'll see if that happens. So it's just kind of like WVU and the print program there was kind of the catalyst for where I am now in regards to like printmaking. And my art is very like socially focused. It's usually events that have happened to me, kind of like Becci, events that happen to me that I'm trying to put out into the world. But the museum studies and art history side come in where I'm realizing it's not enough to just share my story. I have to uplift and share others because I am only one drop in the ocean. So yeah, it's very vague, but since we're dropping our socials and websites later, people will see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually just was talking to Joseph like just yesterday because he reached out just kind of about Pine Copper Lime and was telling me that, that I guess West Virginia University is waiving its application fees, and asked if I could mention that on the podcast. And then I actually got my MA from University of Arizona in art history, the focus in printmaking. So
awesome.
I loved it. I loved Tucson so much. And then, of course, Aaron is an alumni of Pine Copper Lime. So this small printmaking world continues, continues to do its work. So wonderful. Well, thank you both for giving that bit of background. And so now let us turn to the Radical Intersectional Printmakers Guild. And I would love you maybe just to dissect that name a little bit. Because I know from your first meeting that I watched that it's a very intentional name and that every bit of it has some meaning, which helps sort of answer the question what your goals are for this group.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of what comes into that name is Olivia and I had a very conscious, intentional conversation about the value that gets placed on a name and the impression essentially that a name carries. And so we chose specifically the words. So we started with radical, which is sort of relating to or affecting that fundamental nature of something, but it's also advocating for thorough social change. And it's interesting because we've been asked a couple of times, why radical? And what I think is really interesting is people have an innate kind of knee-jerk negative response in some cases to that word, probably because of associations with certain other groups, but also there are a lot of radical groups that have been vilified throughout history with like a conscious, decisive, governmental, often narrative when all they're doing is asking for equal rights, like the Black Panthers, for instance. Not that we're really creating a parallel between us and them, but they were basically just creating school programs for lunches and more, specific things as well. But in their inception, they were merely just saying we're people too. And that's essentially what we're kind of hearkening back to, is that radical stance that people are all equally human beings and society should be able to reflect that. And then, of course, we incorporated intersectional because we do believe in intersectionality, the way that it was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. And intersectionality is essentially understanding individuals' identities as part of kind of a grid system. And it's funny because in one of our meetings, we were talking about what that really meant. There are some people who might have one intersection. There are people who might have two or three, or there are people like me who might as well be a roundabout, And it's kind of saying that we're open to all of those intersections, and then also the intersections between those identities interpersonally.
It also goes into, besides just identity-wise, we get a lot of questions about who can join. And I mean that to say, like, if I'm not a printmaker outright, but maybe I'm a curator who specializes in print. Is this for me? Or I'm an art historian who studies print. Is this for me? So that intersection where print, it doesn't have to just be the physical making of prints, but any kind of
in any real way. And it's also people who are at the intersection of print and the rest of the world. Printmaking isn't something that's insular, which is often something that, people expect it to be or sometimes want it to be. It's something that hits the community. It's part of the community. I know a lot of printmakers, including myself, got involved in printmaking because multiples meant that they were cheaper to make, but also that you could give them to people for free without feeling bad, or you could plaster them on walls. And printmaking is that kind of agent for social change. And so it's really important to talk about that intersection between print and bigger, broader communities.
Another Joe-ism, I guess. I'm probably going to gush about him a lot, but he really pushed the idea of print is everything. Printmaking is everything. So I feel like this group kind of embodies that, and I try my best to embody that as well.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think in his original context, maybe this is just the way I took it to mean, we were talking about materiality. So printmaking doesn't have to be one of the major processes. It could be putting water on the bottom of your feet and walking on a sidewalk and seeing that print happen, and then it evaporates from the sun and you do it over again. Or it could be bleaching paper or shirts, something like that. But you can also make the argument that paintings are just monotypes, but I feel like a lot of painters would get mad at that. So it's that idea of physically and materiality, material wise, it can be anything. It doesn't have to stick to the classics. And that's also talking to Becky's, it's a cheaper option because you have kitchen printmaking, where you're finding you're doing the potato stamp. So many people, when I mention that I'm a printmaker, they're like, "Oh, I did a potato stamp in middle school."
Yeah, I get that too. Yeah.
That's a first. We never did that. I never knew about that. So that's really interesting to hear. But I think also just in concept of what a print is, in concept, it's just imprinting something on somebody else. So that could be ideas, the sharing of ideas, and someone walking away with maybe a shared idea or a story. I feel like if you can validate it as a print, it can be a print. If you can explain to somebody what makes this printmaking, then it fits. It's adaptable.
That's such an interesting concept, that idea of kind of ideas as print and multiplicity, and distributing information can be a form of it. Reproduction and distribution of information, whether that information is a highly technical aquatant or your footprints on the sidewalk or an idea that people are people, it's all that kind of reproduction and distribution. So we've done radical, we've done intersectional. I think printmaker, I feel like we've addressed that too. Printmaking's everything, yeah. How about guild?
So guild is something that we kind of stumbled upon initially because I think I made a facetious little joke where I was just like, "We are the guild," and then Olivia was like, "Well, wait, what does that really mean?" And we looked into the actual meaning of it, and it really is just any association of people that are working for their mutual aid, and also the pursuit of a common goal. And when we looked at that, we were like, "Oh yeah, that's exactly what this is." We're exactly that.
Yeah.
We want to be able to support each other in a way that's mutually beneficial. It doesn't require any kind of self-sacrifice. It doesn't require any kind of competition necessarily. There's always room for healthy competition, but that competition would be, geared towards making each other better instead of stealing opportunities or something like that, or even phrasing it that way or thinking of it that way.
Also a safer space to learn from our mistakes, which Becci was really harping on, which I agree with.
Yeah, it's very important to both of us that we are a space where we encourage growth. And when I think about growth, I don't just think about the individual. I also think about community-based growth. I think about practice-based growth. I think about all of the many levels at which just coexisting as much as we can across kind of the universe without having that sense of it's me or them, or it's us versus them, without having that type of division. I think it's really, really beneficial to talk about growth, where it's like we look at what someone else has, and instead of saying, oh, I wish I could do that. I don't understand how that person does 25 things in a day. I only have the capacity to do 3, and then I have to go look at a bird for 25 minutes. Like, you know, instead of degrading ourselves, we can say, oh, I wonder how you do that. Why don't I talk to you about it? Why don't I, you know, ask for advice and see if these things kind of work for me? And what you'll learn from that kind of thing is often, like, the way that I work is not a conventional way to work. I'm very much a person who, like, I did a visiting artist workshop last year in fall, for example, and we did 4 projects in a week, and that's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much a person that I spend a lot of time doing a bunch of different things, and printmaking is perfect for that because we wheat pasted 6-foot tall hand printed monster impressions. We also printed some very small, one of my smallest plates in a chincolet. And it was just all these different things going on. But then I would, you know, if I were to compare myself to somebody who works more traditionally, I would start to make myself feel bad.
Right.
But they might see the way that I work and say, wow, I wish I could just get everything done all in one week, like a crazy person.
Yeah.
And we can kind of have that communication of working styles and ideas. I'm sorry about my words.
It is a long tradition of dogs in the background on the Pine Copperline podcast. Like, printmakers have so many dogs, so your pups are in good company.
They like attention for sure.
Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things I really liked about the use of the word guild is, for me, it feels like it's connecting printmaking to its deeply historical tradition of being radical. You know, I think about guild, I think about what Albrecht Dürer might have been involved in. I think about, you know, something that might be in the 1500s when the printing press was used to translate the Bible from Latin into a common tongue for the first time, and like nearly destroyed the Catholic Church. You know, like it is like printmaking has always been radical because giving people information is forever a radical idea. So what I loved about it is that with Guild, it has this just, and maybe this is not your intention, but at least as me as a print historian nerd receiving it, I was like, yes, like this is, we as printmakers have been using printmaking to shake things up since someone first invented that technology.
Absolutely. I think for me, at least, it was probably subconscious because I often tell people the reason I got into print was, or like the reason print is my medium and the art I make is because of what you just said, the radical nature of it and how it was used to resist. I also just love, I didn't take it all the way back to like its history, and probably because it's founded by 2 Black and brown individuals who wouldn't have been let anywhere near
Yes, correct.
these presses or them. So I kind of love that idea of this kind of like, I know Hamilton's kind of like, it doesn't have the same meaning as it did when it came out, but this idea of like putting brown and Black people in the spot of old white masters. And I'm saying that in heavy quotes.
Black femmes too. I think
that too.
A really big integral part of this, because from what I understand, there are a lot of print associations that throughout history have consciously excluded femme personas and femme beings from the discourse. And this is also true in, you know, larger art history, but it's not often that femme presenting people would really get involved in this medium. And so I do think, you know, reclaiming that, not even just reclaiming it, but continuing the narrative on the usage of that term, I think is really important. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because that isn't necessarily something that was at the forefront of our minds, you know?
I do think it was subconscious, though.
Yes, probably.
Yeah, for sure. And even, yeah, when I was pontificating about that historical context, you know, that idea of definitely, though, making sure not to not to sugarcoat the past either, to be like it was so great back then. Look at all these radical things they were doing. And it was like, well, their version of radical really bore no resemblance on ours, because things were just different for sure. But I love that context that you put it in of centering yourselves and your bodies and your personas in this place that was exclusionary up until very, very, very recently in our histories. Now we sort of know the story behind the name of the RIPG. How did it come about? How did you two know each other? What was the impetus for deciding to take on a kind of huge undertaking in the middle of an year that's already asking a lot from us emotionally and energetically?
The direct causation, we could say, was after George Floyd's passing. There were a lot of kind of public letters being sent out by print organizations that were often, they kind of felt like too little too late. To be specific, there was something that SGCI sent out that was very much inadequate and criticized pretty publicly by a lot of people, including ourselves. And there was something about that moment where we were talking to each other and we had this kind of aha moment for you, Olivia, but it was for me, where I realized that up until this point, I'd been advocating for representation. Like I was going to be the representation. I was going to be the brown, fat, Hispanic, femme, queer professor that showed my students that you can do this, because representation does matter. But that moment was when I realized, representation's not enough. We need to do some things for ourselves so that institutions that were never built for us can learn how to either restructure or to rebuild. And I also am just a very impatient person. And so I've been going to the SGCI and other print conferences for about 5 years. And there was a certain moment where I was just like, I don't want to wait for you guys to get with the program. Maybe I'll just do this myself, and it's not necessarily just a critique of those specific programs. It's more us having that kind of realization. And I don't want to put words into your mouth, Olivia, but having that realization that some things you just have to do for yourself.
And that's something as marginalized individuals, we often have to ask ourselves, are we going to suffer in these spaces that are not meant for us? Or are we going to leave them and do what we need to do for ourselves? Which is an unfair position to be put in again and again. But at the end of the day, it is kind of bigger than we know that we are not the only two people who have had these issues at these conferences and workshops and all of that. So it wouldn't just be for us, it'd be for everybody who feels that way.
Who feel underserved by the existing community structures.
Oh, and also unheard, because there have been multiple, and you mentioned, public criticizing of the letters that they sent out, but also you attending town hall meetings. And I have also told other students, because I started college 2015, graduated 2019, and I started grad school 2019. So I've been a student in these spaces since I started going. And talking to other students about how affordable it is or how unaffordable it is truly, and how it isn't, these things aren't really geared towards students. It doesn't just have to do with identity. It is, again, that intersection of people who aren't at the top just being underserved and not heard, and then getting tired. I'm also a very impatient person, and just not wanting to wait around for someone to do right by you. And the other thing I was going to say was, going back to how we met, I believe it was Frogman's 2017.
Yeah, that sounds right. I don't know.
And I want to say it was the first night or the second night. They usually do a open portfolio, so everybody in that week can meet each other and see each other's work, and start conversations. And I can't remember if one of our mutual friends brought me over to Becky's table, or if I just happened to wander over on my own. But I remember seeing these really rad little creatures who looked very sad, and were very like gelatinous and blob-like, and just like starting a conversation with you about them, and it kind of kicked off from there, I'd
Turned
say.
into a lifelong Kiki, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, we met there, and then I actually went over to Olivia's table. You know how that kind of goes, and we started talking more and more about personal experiences, and we're also, because we're brown femme presenting people, we're part of the same whisper networks, and so we're aware of some of the failings of other faculty, other academic institutions, professional organizations, etc. And the more we kept hearing, the more we would kind of convene with each other and say things like, "Can you believe?" And I think at a certain point we stopped questioning it, and we were just like, "Okay, great, like another one of these fucking situations," you know.
And also going back to your it wasn't really a question, but your statement about how this kicked off in 2020, which has been a heck of a year. I think the culmination of everything that's happened this year, it was for me, Becky talks about her aha moment. For me, it was more of a that's it kind of moment. Like, I've had enough.
Yeah.
I've been pushed over the edge. I've had it. Let's do something. Because, yeah, it's been just from the get, it's been a wild ride, to say the least. So I part of me honestly wonders if the whole world hadn't shut down because of a mass pandemic, both like COVID and the systemic killing of Black and brown people that's just been like super, like it's always happened, but super in the news right now. I'm not entirely sure this would have happened. Like, I don't know if RIPG would have happened. I think eventually, but I think it was just like a pressure cooker of events that just made it happen faster.
Yeah, that makes sense that the events of 2020, which seems to be the common nomenclature to try and sum it up, although it feels so ineffectual to just say that, but the events of 2020 sound like, yeah, they were actually more of a catalyst than a hurdle to starting this, and deciding that this is where you want to put your energies and your time.
Plus, we had nothing but time at that moment, or at
Right.
least I did.
Yeah.
Classes pretty much shut down, and then it turned into summer. And yeah, so I had a lot more time at the
Yeah.
beginning. So yeah.
Yeah, and probably I think like a lot of us, just a lot more not wanting to sit on your hands. So it's not, it's not like having a vacation or having a break where you're like, oh, I can, this is great, I can do nothing. Like I can only imagine that it must have had this feeling of, I have this time and I have all of these energies and emotions and histories inside of me. What am I going to do with it?
I also think it was a way for me closer to printmaking because we went online. Our school was on spring break when everything shut down, and they just told everyone don't come back. And I eventually, like a month into the quarantine, I moved back home to Virginia, and I was doing classes and everything from there. So I didn't have any access to print, really. Like, I was working on 2 lithos right when it happened, and I had to abandon them. I had to abandon like the shop and the people who were surrounding it and be told to try and make work. And like, so I felt super isolated from printmaking. So I think when Becky and I were already talking before all this happened. So then I think when an opportunity to be reconnected to like printmaking and the printmaking community, my brain was just like, absolutely.
And I definitely agree with that, because I've only been out of grad school for a year and a half-ish. And so for me, when we left graduate school, we moved back to North Carolina, and I'm in a part of North Carolina where printmaking is not, when you say that you're a printmaker, they go with like computers. And
yeah.
like, sometimes. But it's kind of more of a dearth of that. And I also had to kind of abandon the majority of my relationships with other printmakers were in the Midwest, with the exception of Brandon Sanderson, who was he's my print dad. And so, it was good to reconnect with him, but it felt in a lot of ways like I was sacrificing a lot of that community. And then I started to think, well, why Why should I have to do that? Why should I feel that way? Why is it that people don't know what printmaking is? And then we started kind of picking apart all of the ways in which people could get to know us and could get to have more opportunities and specifically see more printmakers in the world and understand what printmaking is, and how there could be more opportunities for people who are like us, who can't afford to pay for a residency or move halfway across the state, or well, halfway across the country at the drop of a hat for a residency. And that became like a really, I think, an impetus for me to really kind of dedicate a lot of my time to this. Yeah. Plus Olivia's in school, so I'm not expecting her to put in that same, like, this is what I'm going to do, sink her talents into it at the same level as you.
I feel like this is a really good opportunity to ask you both just to sort of explicitly state, what are the goals of RIPG? I feel like we've been kind of skirting around it a little bit because we're talking about like the name and we're talking about your motivations, but you're putting all of this energy into it. We know your kind of motivations leading up, but what are you wanting to accomplish? What is your vision for printmaking and contemporary printmaking in 10 years? And what role did RIPG have in that?
One of the kind of ways to talk about that is I really want to see inclusion from the beginning, like inclusion from inception. I want people to think about each other more consciously in the art world, and not in diversity kind of nomenclature where you're saying, well, we're not going to discriminate against you. Okay, that's great. Are you going to include me? Right. Not discriminating against me, including me, are two very different things. And I want, my perfect world personally would have inclusion at the forefront and growth as that undercurrent of inclusion, where Olivia and I were recently talking about this. There's a lot of people in the world who think that when their racism is pointed out, it's like a death sentence. Yeah. And it's really not. It's an opportunity. It's an invitation to become a better person, to learn something new. And it's the same with ableism. It's the same with really any kind of discriminatory implicit bias. We're inviting you to analyze where that's coming from and to choose to be a better person and to grow and have more exposure to people who don't look like you and don't have your life experiences. And I hope that we can create at least one place, but hopefully more, where people who might not feel encouraged by their professor who doesn't look like them, or the other students at their prestigious art university who they happen to be the scholarship student and everybody else suddenly, can afford all the materials for their class, but they can't. We're hoping to find a place, or create a place really, for them to have that sense of inclusion and for their voices to not just be heard, but to be valued almost implicitly in the same way that more contemporary straight white male artists' voices are valued. And especially, I think that's my personal mission. But I also think it's really important to realize, verbalize really, that RIPG is by members for members. So that's my personal kind of mission statement. But what I really hope for RIPG to become is something that reflects its membership, because I might change in the next 10 years. I might have different expectations for myself and for other people. Gender might get even more complicated. At which point, which honestly, I think it probably should. But at that point, we're going to be using different terminology. We're going to be thinking of different ways to include different types of people. And I really hope that will be built in, that responsiveness, the fluidity to grow with the times. Because what we're seeing a lot recently is a bunch of old white institutions just kind of crumbling. Because they don't know how to go online, or they don't know how to interact with diverse people without making us feel like tokens, or they don't know how to do anything other than pay a white man to do something that a brown person's been doing for 25 years, Um, there's a lot of that kind of disintegration happening, and I'm hoping that this will, at the very least, give people an alternative direction to kind of put their energy into.
I kind of set out with the goal of RIPG being to prove to a lot of white people, a lot of older white printmakers, that printmakers like Becci and I and so many other people do exist. I was at a conference that was like the Midwest-ish area, and it was suggested that there a lot, like, we just aren't there. Like, the reason a lot of these opportunities aren't going to Black and brown people is because they're just not in print. And I know anytime I go to something like that, or print classrooms or anything, the first thing I do when I walk in is I count how many people are like me. Just which is because, as we're talking about intersections, there's probably so many more, but just like the face value ones. And it's usually me or me and one other person. And I know that's not true from going to workshops and conferences and just the people I've met on the internet and through other friends. So it kind of, for me, that's how it started. But once Becky and I started talking about it, my goal kind of shifted to be something that doesn't exist yet. All of these institutions are crumbling because it's just, this isn't that era anymore. So I'd love for it to be something that is inclusive and diverse from the get. Like, there's no, oh, we have to add this for you or rearrange things because it wasn't built for you. I want it to be built for everyone. So no one walks in and has to look around and count. They just walk in and feel like this is where they belong.
They don't have to ask. Like, one of my biggest pet peeves is, so I have multiple people in my life who are hearing impaired, and the number of times that they've gone to events with me where they have to turn off their hearing aids because either the music is too loud and like cacophonous and it's genuinely hurting them, or they have to turn them super high up because they can't hear anybody because nobody's wearing a microphone. Like, how can you have a demo where you know hundreds of people are going to it and not mic it up? I don't understand.
Or provide like translators, like sign interpreters.
Exactly. There's no accommodations made, which one is in violation of the ADA. But also, regardless of the legality of it, it's just fundamentally unfair. You know,
it screams, you're not meant to be here. You are an afterthought. Like, you are not our target audience.
We didn't even know you were coming. We didn't know you existed. Right. And now you have to validate your own existence to me. Like, I have my own invisible kind of disabilities and neurodiversities, but people just pass that off as like, oh, you're quirky and you're fat. You know? And I'm like, well, I like can't walk. So that's part of it. And also, like, I can't string thoughts together. So, you know, but it's also it's mind-boggling to me how difficult people act like it is to be inclusive and to be considerate for 5 minutes of their time. You know, it doesn't take long for you to make a map saying this is how far it's going to be from this venue to this venue.
Yeah.
But the fact that it doesn't occur to you to do that shows me that you live in a world where you don't consider people who are in wheelchairs as valid human beings. And that's absolutely unacceptable. It's just fucking unacceptable. Like, I can't process it. And we're not by any means perfect. We are going to have moments where somebody might point out something for us. Like, for instance, it's taking us a very long time to figure out what to do for CCs on YouTube.
Oh my God, it is not easy.
Yeah,
it is very
types it by hand or for the 3-hour meetings. Or I actually recently figured out that when I record to Zoom in, this is kind of irrelevant, but so you can cut it if you want. But when I record to Zoom, it creates a transcript, which I figured out recently how to download that transcript and upload it to YouTube. And it's not a perfect transcript. It's based on what, you know, the program hears, but we're learning slowly but surely, like, ways to make this quicker and make it more streamlined and efficient because we cared from the beginning, you know? And it's not us having to go, oh, you exist too? What? Now what? You know? or us, like I've had moments where I've had to point out to people, hey, your programming is implicitly ableist, and they will get defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and it's like,
defensive is a big one.
Why? Who does that serve?
Mm-hmm.
Does it just serve your ego, which I don't give a shit about? Or does it serve the people that you're sitting telling me you represent? Because like, I'm probably never going to see you again. You've already rubbed me the wrong way. I don't ever really want to see you again because I'm a very confrontational person. And we're going to talk about what happened,
Yeah.
and you're not going to like the outcome. But it's a really frustrating thing to see how often people would rather just not think about someone else.
People don't want to be held accountable for their actions or inactions.
Exactly. And it's incredibly frustrating. And I would like for people, I am, again, a confrontational person, but that's because I grew up in a family of women who are we're very direct. When we have we're like, hey, remember that thing you did to me 3 weeks ago? Didn't realize it now, but that really upset me. Let's talk about it,
Yeah.
Something else Becci had said earlier about the goal of RIPG, the by members for members. I think it's also hard for either of us to know where this is going to go because we're only two people. And we try to push this a lot. Like, yes, we call ourselves co-founding members because eventually we want to get to a point where this isn't about us. It's about the guild as a whole. So all of its members. And like Becci said, like where this goes is going to be determined by the larger group, not just us. So what we want to happen may or may not happen in that like the exact thing we want to happen. I'm sure it'll still be inclusive and diverse and for everybody and a place to learn, but like how it takes shape is going to be kind of a surprise, which I'm very excited about.
Definitely. And I don't know if you two mind for a second, just talking shop really quick as content providers and accessibility, because transcripts for the podcast has been a huge thing for me trying to find how to do it. That it doesn't cost $200 an episode to have a human do it accurately, but isn't like a robot. And it sounds like maybe you're looking for ways to get transcripts or closed captions as well. So should you come across that program or that reasonably priced service, I would love it if you reached out and let me know, because I've been looking for it. And it's like, particularly with printmaking, because we use really specific words when we talk about it. And so the robots have no idea what to make out of lithotine, like it's just, it just doesn't work. But it's something that does weigh heavy on me, that I understand, like with this audio platform that does cut out a lot of people. So if you find the magic key, yeah,
we'll absolutely pass it on. But that's also in itself, like I talk to people about how I finished my language requirement in high school early and I wanted to take American Sign Language. And I remember multiple people telling me that I shouldn't take it because it wouldn't count towards a college credit, which like this idea of taking something to like benefit yourself is wild to, like, I know it's capitalism. Like, obviously we should try and want to do better and provide for our disabled, like just friends, just people in general, because you shouldn't have to be friends with someone to care about.
Yeah. Weird people don't like to be called disabled.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Well, I just meant disabled in general, not just like hearing impaired, like all of the disabilities. You shouldn't care. That's what I meant. But thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
But yeah, just like how difficult it is to try and get the knowledge to be able to interact with all of these people. They make it very, and I say they as in like society and the government and everything, make it extremely difficult for that to happen unless you directly have somebody like that in your life. And I think it makes me so angry.
Yeah, it's a saying in the neurodiverse community and in the hearing impaired and deaf and a lot of disabled communities as well, that you're not the one who is disabled or impaired or something wrong with you. what it is there's a society that exists that consciously decided continually to make things inaccessible to you. And there's no reason we have to have stairs, period. We could literally just have ramps everywhere, but we don't. Ramps would be safer for children too, but nobody makes that argument. You know, it's one of those kinds of examples.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
Teaching sign language along with like English or whatever language you're learning in your schools from like kindergarten or preschool onward. Like that would be so helpful instead of it being a specialty language that you should only take if in the event that someone like that is in your life. So
well, and even when you have somebody like that in your life, it's very difficult to be able to find free classes on it, because my nephew is hearing impaired and my sister for a very long time she just had to rent books from the library because she couldn't afford his hearing aids and being able to go to a class to learn ASL to teach him ASL. So
interesting, because the schools by the not the schools but the programs by me where I was growing up, maybe this is because it's the DMV as opposed to North Carolina, but they had a bunch of programs for people, but if you didn't have somebody affected directly in your like personal life, you couldn't take it. Like they're free for you, but if you because I was even like, what if I paid for it? Like, I'm not trying to go for free. I understand that. And they're like, no, it's not for you. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it does seem like that the economics of it are so often the hurdles, you know, like trying to get the transcripts for this podcast. Like if I had $200 an episode, so that's $800 a month, then I could make PCL, oh my gosh, like as accessible as I wanted it to be, you know, like, or at least when it comes to helping people who are hearing impaired. And then I'd probably need more, you know, to address, you know, any kind of like accessibility barrier that I perceived. So, but it's just the amount of money, let alone time that it takes is significant. It really is, for sure. Kind of like in this sort of camp of inclusivity and accessibility, you know, you're building your organization from the ground up with these ideas in your forefront of your mind. What would you like to see other printmaking organizations do? Like, and I know that this sort of like, this isn't your job, but if you have this platform right now, which does get listened to a lot of people in the print community, if you just want to say, look, if you just did this one thing, it would be better. Is there anything like that you want to say on that?
I think the biggest thing is to stop deflecting. It's not helping anybody. It makes you look really, really bad. Like it's a waste of your energy. It really genuinely is. It would be faster, simpler, and more correct for you to just apologize.
Yeah.
You know, and
mean it. Apologize and mean it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And give demonstrable actual action that you are going to take to remedy the problem. Also, probably changing a lot of the way that bylaws are structured, the way that I think I've kind of noticed in other print organizations is they're kind of tacked on over time. And maybe there's something in the local laws for nonprofits that I'm not aware of, but it seems kind of odd to just keep tacking on more and more committees instead of just possibly readdressing what the board of directors are supposed to be doing, you know? And it also seems very weird to have things like committees on diversity that don't have the ability to vote. Why would you have that committee if they're not able to actually contribute to institutional change?
Well, it's just even further than that. I would say members being allowed to vote, because I know some of them, it's like it's chosen for you and your vote is merely like a nicety. Like no matter what you vote, it's already been decided. It's kind of more of a like popular, like, how do we feel about this? And if the majority feel like we hate this decision, it's like, well, that's too bad. Here you go. So like actually letting your members vote and participate and decide what they want instead of a bunch of people in a room who are pretty, in my opinion, not all of them, but a vast majority pretty out of touch with the future of print or even the present, the print present. I feel like a lot of them are living in the good old days.
Right.
Yes. And they're all
so.
quite homogenous as well. And I think another thing is to consider what you really think a diversity hire is. Pay people for their labor. And then, be transparent. I don't know why you feel the need to have secrets. I genuinely do. We haven't gotten to that point of incorporation, so,
Yeah. Yeah. It's because, secrets equal hierarchy equals power equals, protection, I guess, in someone's mind. I have no idea, but I know exactly what you mean. So let people know how they can get involved in RIPG. I know you've had a couple of meetings online. You had your first meeting and second meeting are both available on YouTube for anyone who wants to kind of follow up and sort of see what they missed if they're being introduced to what you're doing for the first time. But moving forward, when people hear this and they're like, yes, they are playing my song. I want to be involved. I want to help. I want to be involved in an organization that's like taking these ideas on in the contemporary printmaking world. What is the best way for them to go do that?
We have several different platforms. You can follow us on Instagram at RIPrint Guild, or you could send us an email and join our mailing list. Our email address is riprintguild@gmail.com. You can also check out our YouTube. Whenever you join our mailing list, we will send you a link to our YouTube channel. And then we also, I actually today uploaded a YouTube video of our legal meeting that happened just last weekend. And so if you wanted to look at that as well. And then today, a little while earlier, I also started promoting, we're doing our first voting session for all members. We're having every potential prospective member who wants to fill out a kind of response form for I don't know if this will be relevant when the podcast comes out, but they're going to be filling out that kind of voting form on Google Forms for our mission statement and whether or not they feel served by it and any kinds of suggestions they may or may not have. And also whether or not it will translate well, because I know institutional jargon does not always translate to real sentences in other languages. So things like that, definitely reach out to us through Instagram or through our email, and feel free to look at our YouTube.
Beautiful.
Also, we're checking the comment section of our YouTube. So if you, if we discuss something in those videos, which brace yourself, especially for the first one, it's like 3 hours long. We had a lot to talk about, and they're slowly getting shorter, but they're still like a couple hours long. But yeah, if something comes up in the video that you like, a question is raised and you want to respond or you want to ask us a question, the comment section is perfectly fine for that. And that's kind of why we wanted to do videos as well, because a lot of meetings and things get discussed where people can't actually access them. So this was our solution for how can we reach as many people for as long as possible. So
yes, yeah, and our most recent 2 videos involve our really awesome team of volunteers who are definitely helping us expedite this process quite a bit. Expedite, that's the correct word, expedite. And that's really been helpful too. So you'll get to kind of see them, and we'll also start promoting them a little bit on our social media, so you know who we're made up of, what we're made of, like a giant human goulash. That's terrifying. I'm sorry.
It's like, now we are marketing. Yeah.
Well, also with every member who eventually joins, which we're calling them volunteers, they're absolutely members. We just legally can't have them yet because we're not incorporated yet.
Okay.
Right? Something like that.
We can't accept membership donations yet until we are legally incorporated. Otherwise, one individual member would have to claim that on their taxes, and we're not going to anybody.
Yeah.
So they absolutely are members, but right now they're being called volunteers, which they also are. But we plan to promote every member eventually once we get them, because I think for me, that's another part of like you said, representation matters, and that visibility, like who, and also the transparency of like who we are. So if there's somebody in that group who is harmful to multiple people, you can look on our Instagram, see who's a part of it, let us know, we can do something about it. Yeah, because I feel like with a lot of the groups currently, it's kind of, you only know about either their featured member or their board members, and that's it. Like everybody else is just a kind of nebulous idea that's like part of these organizations. So it's very important to us to also just promote people, because again, if you're a student, you're not maybe getting the same kind of like recognition or advertisement as a professional in the field, or a someone who's like affiliated with a university or something like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I also want to kind of emphasize that the next 6 months are going to be kind of a crucial time for participation in the formation of the guild. So our general plan is to kind of be it's an ambitious plan, but we're hoping to be at the incorporation stage in the early months of next year, so we can start accepting membership fees. But before we can do that, we have to establish our bylaws, and we want to make sure that potential members get to weigh in on each section of the bylaws as we formulate them. So definitely start looking out for that kind of stuff for us if you'd like to join our group. Beautiful. Or from us. Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely put links in the show notes to all of it. And yeah, no, I admire so much the work that you both are doing, and the intentionality that you're taking to it, and the willingness to do it to the best of your abilities and receive feedback at the same time, because that is, I think, one of the big stumbling blocks for people, which we talked about before, is this sort of reactionary, like, but I'm doing the best that I can. You know, like when you get called out or when you get feedback, like as if that's supposed to be this shield that holds up and is like, you can't criticize me, I'm trying. And it sounds like you have a lot of opportunities in place for feedback and for learning and growing in real time as you're building something, which is a wonderful undertaking, and I'm really excited to see what comes of it.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm also excited to see what comes of it.
Me too. And you know, that reminds me of one thing that my mom always says. There's a difference between an explanation and an excuse. We both have a good handle on the difference between those two.
Yeah. And then where can people find your individual work, your individual prints?
I am on Instagram, so it's the Daily Grind Press on Instagram, all lowercase. And then my website is oliviarichardsonart.com, which, be kind, it's still under construction. But it absolutely has work up that you can go check out. Yeah, and it's also linked on my Instagram.
Beautiful. Yeah. Becci?
Yeah. And for me, you could follow me on Instagram at Becci Prints. It's not spelled how it sounds. It's at BECCI Prints. And I'm not one of the website gang kind of members. So I do have one, but it's very, very old. It's beccispruill.wixsite.com/Becci Prints. So if you want to, look at some old prints.
There's your archive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you both so much for the work that you're doing, and for taking an hour out of your evening to talk with me. And I'm really excited to share this conversation with everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for listening to us ramble.
It was great. I really felt like there was so much that I wanted to say in response, but I was like, we're not getting coffees, you're interviewing these two great people, there's just so much in there that we touched on about inclusivity and diversity, and and the old guard of printmaking, which like, oh, don't get me started, you know. So it's just, there's just so much in there, and I really think it would be great to have you both on again in maybe 6 months, a year, when you're starting to see the fruits of your labors and kind of re-examine that process. And I really meant what I was saying about like I admire so much the way that you're undertaking this, and I'm hoping that it can inspire other people to think this way when they go about building something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be fantastic to kind of touch base in that time frame. And we really do appreciate that it's not easy to think about other people all the time, but it's still important.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think that's like, if I wanted to like have like a campaign slogan for 2020, maybe that could be it in one phrase. Like, it's not easy all the time, but it doesn't mean that you get off the hook from trying to, you know.
Yeah.
Well, that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Lisette Chavez of Holy Press and Show Me Your Print Shop. We'll talk about death, grief, life, and how all of them intersect within art. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing help from Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.